All right. So again, we left off at the top of page 93, first full paragraph, and we just got into starting this chapter a little bit ago. And I was just looking back, and I just want to hit on a couple of things. Like I said, there's a lot of clear-cut directions in here concerning how to work with a newcomer, right? Never knew that before. I never knew that there was actually directions. I always thought the sponsorship was some kind of a magical thing that maybe when you get 10 or 15 years, maybe it just comes to you and then you can work with people and those people really start recovering. Because if you don't have a lot of time, then you fail with, it seems like everybody, because I failed so many times with so many people. So I had no idea, but there's actually directions in here. And so much so, it's not just, we think about step 12 of carrying the message. We think about chapter 7, working with others, because it pretty much states what we're supposed to be doing. But it's actually chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. 5 of the 11 chapters in the first portion of this book are all directions we're going to find on working with others. So there's a lot of clear-cut directions in here. And so from the beginning, if we're looking at our do's and our don'ts, this is very clear-cut. On top page 90, it says when you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, so when you discover somebody, do find out all you can about him. That's number 1. If he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. Very clear cut. Do's and don'ts. Find out what you can about him. What's the most important thing you want to find out? The next thing. Does the guy really or gal really want to quit drinking? If they don't try to persuade them. Don't say, you're really young, and if you get a hold of this now, you could really. No, we don't try to persuade them. Actually, we're going to find later it's quite the opposite. If you think you can control it, please go out and try. And if you are an alcoholic and do not end up killing yourself while you're out there, maybe you'll experience enough pain that will bring you back and be willing. If you're nagging and you're constantly on them, they may not want to come back. And that's what it says. It may spoil a later opportunity. That's why we don't do that. We're not crusaders here. And it also says, get this, that advice is given to his family also. We're going to see a lot about this. Well, who's going to give that advice to his family? Well, that would be us. Did we know when we're mentoring people, we're supposed to be working with their family? Who knew? I never heard that before. But you're going to find that in the next paragraph on page 90. If there's any indication he wants to stop, so if you even get an indication that he may want to stop, then you can move forward. So what's the next thing you do? The very next thing we do, have a good talk with the person that's most interested in him. That would probably be a spouse, or it could be a parent. But right from the get-go, after the first conversation, we're going to talk to somebody who is most interested in him. So we can find out, well, it tells us what we're going to find out. We want to get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leanings. We need to know that stuff so we know how to put ourselves in his place if the tables were turned. So that's what we do and don't do. If he does, last paragraph, he does not want to see you, what do? Do you keep calling on him? No, never force yourself upon him. And also back to the family, they should not hysterically plead for him to do anything. That could be a very hard thing to try to impress upon them. And you're going to have to really understand this book well enough to be able to explain to them why. Because they don't want him to die. And they're thinking, if I can get involved and get into his head, and he's going to do it. Help us get him straight. We can't. And neither can you. The only thing that's going to persuade the person is enough pain. It's just the way it works. And that's what needs to be explained to them. So what else do we got? Clear-cut directions. So now we get on to page 91. What do we got? Third paragraph, about midway down the page. To see your man alone if possible. So now this is if the guy or gal decides they do want to quit. Now we've talked with the person closest to them. So now we're going to have the first real conversation with the person. And the what do they call them? A prospect, right? It says, at first, what do? Engage in general conversation. And it goes into talking about if he's in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles that alcohol caused you. So who's doing the talking here? I am, right? This is where we do the talking. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. And then you can start getting him to talk about his. We do the talking. So it's general conversation about our drinking. Then it says, and I would underline this last sentence there, it says, when he sees you know all about the drinking game, not prior to this, but now we're going to commence to describe ourselves as an alcoholic. He needs to understand that you know about the drinking game. Do you know where we see that at? I was looking at this morning. If you go back to page 17, and this is something that I believe a lot of times we've gotten off base with AA, and I mentioned this a lot. You sit at a first step table. It's like, where do we get this? They'll either designate a table as a first step table, or perhaps there's somebody new, and well, we got a new person, so let's talk about the first step, right? And then people start talking. And what do they start doing right off the bat? They start talking about when they started drinking, and they start talking about all the troubles they got into while they were drinking. And I tell you the problem with that, a couple of things. Number one, for me, that hit me personally, because when I first again came to AA, I was a teenager. I couldn't relate to any of the stuff you're talking about. I never got divorced. I'm not old enough to be married. Never wrecked a car. I wasn't old enough to drive, although I did, but that never happened to me yet. Okay. A lot of these things in what it told me, I didn't realize it then, but what it told me, we're talking about the first step. So we're talking about really what an alcoholic is. Do I belong? And how are you going to present this to me? You're presenting what you went through. And if I can't relate to that, well, wouldn't that mean that maybe I don't belong? Because I haven't gone that far. Maybe it's not me. See how misleading that is? When we were reading on page 44 what an alcoholic is, it has nothing to do with the troubles we got into, right? Nothing to do with it. That is not what we should be talking about, is the troubles that we got into. That is not. In fact, that's what we do, we just read, when we're working one-on-one with a newcomer. Why? Because that sentence said, so that he knows that we know all about the drinking game. That's it. It's not about the solution or anything, just so that he knows that we know about it. And it says that on page 17, last paragraph, go up a few lines, and it says, the feeling of having shared in a common peril. So that's what we're talking about, our common peril, right? The problems we had with drinking. That feeling is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would have never held us together, as we are not joined. We are not joined by our common peril. AA does not grow based on our common peril. In fact, the next sentence, the last paragraph says, the tremendous fact for every one of us is that we discovered a common solution. Same solution, a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news that this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. AA grows up around the solution. The common solution, not the problem. But we do get into the problem when we're working with somebody. And that's where we're at right here. Just so that he understands that we understand the drinking game. So once he understands that, then we start describing ourselves as an alcoholic. Well, how do we describe ourselves as an alcoholic? This goes back to, you better know what an alcoholic is, or you haven't even done the first step yourself. So how do we describe ourselves as an alcoholic? Well, the very next sentence, top of 92, says, you're going to tell them how baffled you were and how you finally learned that you were sick. We had to learn that from this book. Tell them that you learned that you were sick. Specifically goes into talking about the things that we learned in the doctor's opinion about the problem with the mind, the problem with the body. And if you remember, the crux of the problem is the mind. Why is it that every time I quit, I go back and pick it up? What's wrong with my mind? What's different? And it says, show him the mental twist, is what they call it. The mental twist, which leads to the first drink of a spree. The first drink of a spree. We're only talking about, that's what you want to get into. Why is it that I picked it up right before and I had everything to lose? And why is it? And maybe he can match that with his own instincts. Yeah, I tried quitting too. And you know what? I couldn't. And I tried again. And my wife was going to leave me and I did it again. I never understood why. Explain to him that mental twist. Right? We find that on page 24, by the way, the description of that mental twist. So that's how you're to describe yourself as an alcoholic. We do not describe ourselves as an alcoholic by talking about the troubles that we got into and all the problems that came along with it. That is not it. You drink long enough as an alcoholic, that crap's going to happen anyways. That is not what qualifies us as an alcoholic. It's the mental twist. That doesn't happen. We've learned that doesn't happen to normal people. That only happens to us. Going back to, you burn yourself on a hot stove, you never put your hand on it again. Yet we get burned much more than we'd get burned from a hot stove, yet we keep going back to it. Something wrong about that in the mind. And if you're not sure, then just simply ask yourself this: why do you think you did it? Explain to me how it made sense to you to pick it back up again. How did that make sense to it to me, so that we can have a shared understanding of how that's not insane, right? So that's what we want to do. Then it says if you're satisfied he's a real alcoholic, the next thing we do is we dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Hopeless means without any possibility of a solution. Show them every way that you tried to stop. If you explain that mental twist well enough, if you explain it well enough, he will understand that that is why we are beyond human aid. Nobody is going to be able to change my mind to where I'm going to reflect on the consequences before I pick it up. No human being can do that. My willpower has already shown that it doesn't work. Therefore, it is a hopeless condition. And show them from your own experience how that queer mental condition surrounding that first drink prevents normal functioning of our willpower. Okay. Next thing, don't be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusion. Very clear-cut directions. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. It will kill us. And it says you can talk about, near the bottom, it says you can talk about the hopelessness of alcoholism. Why? Why can we talk about it? Why can we say, hey, unlike Dr. Sokorth with Bill, he looked at him and he said, yep, I've seen lots of guys just like you. I know exactly what's going on with you. You're one of these alcoholics of the hopeless variety. And you know what? You're screwed. You're going to die that way. There's nothing I can do for you. That's not a very good thing you want to hear from your doctor, is it? I know what's wrong with you, and there's nothing we can do, right? But this is different. It says you can talk about the hopelessness. Why? Because you offer a solution. Back to that common solution. We offer a solution. So now that we've gotten to there, now we get on the top of 93. Now they said, now you're going to tell him, actually it tells us not to tell him how you got well. Let him ask you. Well, how did you get over this? Right? And then it says, and this is in italics, very important, top of 93, I'd underline, tell him exactly what happened to you. In other words, tell him exactly what you did, exactly what you learned from this book, the exact directions that you took, and exactly what happened as a result of doing it. Didn't we read on the title page that that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is anyways? The story of how, what they did, many thousand men and women, the story of what they did to become recovered from alcoholism. That's what we do. It's exactly what we do. Tell them exactly what happened and stress the spiritual feature freely. A lot of times we might want to kind of shy away from this because we think this guy might be an atheist or agnostic. Well, we don't want to bother him with this God. Let's just kind of sugarcoat it and we'll ease him into it later. No. Why? Because it's the only solution we have to offer. And we've already learned if they're that prejudiced that they do not want to get over alcoholism bad enough that they can overcome that prejudice, then they're going to need to go back out and drink again. And they can either control it or they're going to die, or they may be, what they say in the book, get beat into a state of reasonableness, to at least be open to the idea. You don't have to believe. And that's what we learned about. You don't have to believe. It says again, make it emphatic. He doesn't have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes. We've covered this before, and I'd underline this, provided it makes sense to him. It must be something that makes sense to him. We can't get off on these wild ideas that my coffee cup is my higher power or whatnot. That doesn't make sense. You know, in the second step, it gives us a qualification. Although we don't have to consider anybody else's conception of God, it says we come to believe that there is a power, but not just a power. But the caveat is that power has got to be able to have the power to restore me to sanity. I don't know if you can explain to me how the coffee cup is going to restore you to sanity. I'm all ears to understand that, to make sure it makes sense. But if it doesn't, that doesn't make sense. So it's got to make sense. And then the last thing that I would underline there before we left off, and this again is all in italics. I go over this because it's all very important. The main thing for this newcomer is that one, he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself. He doesn't have to believe, just being willing to listen and try to do the work and see if it works. If he's not even willing to do that, nothing we can do. Because if you don't do the work, we know faith without works is dead, right? We have to do the work. So he has to be willing. And number two is that he also live by spiritual principles. So that's going to be what happens after he recovers. And we're doing step 10, 11, and 12, like 12 that we're talking about now, working with others. He has to be willing to live by these spiritual principles. So the first paragraph on 93 where we left off here, it says, when dealing with such a person, you'd better use everyday language to describe spiritual principles. He's got to live by spiritual principles. We don't want him to believe right off the bat that we're talking about some kind of dogma or religion. Although you may be highly religious. It may be, Jesus Christ or Buddha. You are 100% convinced that is the only higher power, and that is how I was saved from alcoholism. And that's fine. Don't pass that on to a newcomer, because what's going to happen? Our only point now is to try to be helpful. How helpful is that going to be to somebody whose hair on the back of their neck stands up when you start talking about them, some conception of God that they may have rejected when they were younger, right? It is their own conception. Our conception is a personal matter, and we have to keep it that way. We're helping him to make contact with a power that makes sense to him, not mine. There it is. There is no use arousing any prejudice, right? He may have against certain theological terms and conceptions about which he may already be confused. Don't. Do's and don'ts. Don't raise such issues no matter what your own convictions are. Highlight, underline. They don't matter. Your prospect may belong to a religious denomination. Now we're flipping the book, right? Well, what if I'm not? But he is. His religious education and training may be far superior to yours. In that case, he's going to wonder how you can add anything to what he already knows. I've experienced this before with a guy who is the son of a pastor. I was able to use this, thank God. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done, right? But he's going to be curious to learn why his own convictions have not worked and why yours seem to work so well. So my guy didn't take it that far. He says, well, what are you going to add anything about God? I know a lot more than you do. So then I had to ask, well, if that's the case and that's the only solution we offer, why hasn't yours worked? That you're here, right? Looking for help. See, I'm looking to help somebody. I'm not here for help. I'm looking to help somebody. So it's worked for me and it hasn't. Are you curious as to why that is? Might have to bring that question up. He may be an example of the truth that faith alone is insufficient. To be vital. Anybody remember the definition of vital? That word comes up a lot in here. I need to make a little sheet at some point, I think, of just definitions that are in here, some of the main ones. Vital is defined as necessary for life. So we could skim over that and say to be vital and move on. But if you understand that term means necessary for life, look, your ears should start perking up, right? To be vital, faith must be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish constructive action. That's living by spiritual principles. Let him see that you are not there to instruct him in religion. Admit that he probably knows more about it than you do, but call to his attention the fact that however deep his faith and knowledge, he could not have applied it or he wouldn't be drinking, right? That's a simple truth. That's a fact. Perhaps your story will help him see where he has failed to practice the very precepts he knows so well. We represent no particular faith or denomination. We're dealing only with general principles that are common to most denominations. Next thing we do outline the program of action now. So we told them we had a spiritual experience. Now we're going to outline it. Well, if you're interested, I'm going to show you what I did and start outlining what we do from steps 3 all the way to step 9. Begin there to become recovered. And then we can talk about living 10, 11, and 12. But we need to outline the program of action, explaining how you made a self-appraisal. Where'd we do that at? Step 4, right? How you straightened out your past. It's going all the way through into step 9. And why you're now endeavoring to help him. Step 12, the program of action. Underline, it's important for him to realize that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital, necessary for life, part in your own recovery. Okay, I'm not doing this because I want anything from you, but it is necessary for me to live. I mean, we've read, I don't remember what page it's on, I think it's in the early 20s, it says something along the lines of our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend on our constant thought of others. And they're repeating that here. Actually, he may be helping you more than you are helping him. Amen. We've seen that happen a lot. How many have worked with other people? We've talked about this before, working with other people, and how the general consensus has been that a very small amount generally end up going through and becoming recovered. We've talked about this several times. But is it not true that even if you've worked with 50 people and maybe 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it may be, a small percentage had actually recovered, even the ones that did it not help you? There is undoubtedly Undoubtedly, it has helped us. You got to remember the outcome of what happens with this individual you're working with. That is not in our hands. That's in God's hands, right? It's nothing that all we're here to do is lay the tools at their feet. It's up to them to pick them up. And whatever happens with that is between us and God. As soon as I start thinking, well, it's me, I can't seem to help anybody. That's actually selfish self-centeredness. I think it's about me again, right? It's nothing to do with me. Make it plain he's under no obligation to you, that you hope only that he will try to help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties. Suggest how important it is that he place the welfare of other people ahead of his own. What has this got to do with drinking? Nothing, right? See, we know, which we haven't quite explained to him completely, what's our problem? Selfishness, self-centeredness. So what is the opposite of that? Maybe placing the welfare of other people ahead of our own. Start living by that. See how that does. Make it clear that he's under no pressure, that he needn't see you again if he doesn't want to. You should not be offended if he wants to call it off, for he has helped you more than you have helped him. Here it is again. If your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you've perhaps made a friend. Maybe you have disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. This is all to the good. Underline, the more hopeless he feels, the better. Right? That's going to present the willingness. He will be more likely to follow your suggestions. Your candidate may give reasons why he not follow all of the program. We saw that with Bill. Actually, I don't think we actually did. I think it's the first story in the back. But when Bill first worked with Dr. Bob, desperate, willing to follow the program with everything, except I'm not going about my little town here as a doctor, prominent doctor, and let people know that I drink like they didn't know. We found out like everybody knew, but I ain't going to let them all know. And what it's going to do to my reputation, not doing it, wouldn't do it. I can get by with everything else. And what happened? That year, he was getting ready to get on a train to go somewhere out west to a convention that he goes to every year. And his wife's like, Bill, don't let him go. Don't let him go. He drinks every time he goes. And what did Bill say? Listen, either God has removed that obsession of the mind, restored his sanity, or he hasn't. We might as well find out now. And what happened? He drank. He drank. And then what happened? The pain was so great that he disappeared. And they didn't know where he was. He was gone all day. And he comes home really, really late at night. And they're like, where have you been? Thought he'd been drinking all day, right? No, he went about the entire town making amends to everybody. The only thing that's going to bring about that willingness is enough pain. And he felt enough pain. He learned. So your candidate may give reasons why he need not follow all the program. That was an example of why we do need to follow clear-cut directions for it to be rare for us to fail if we thoroughly follow that path. He may rebel against the thought of a drastic house cleaning, which requires, I would underline that word requires, that's another must in our directions, which requires discussion with other people, step 5. Do not contradict such views. Tell him you once felt as he does, but you doubt whether you would have made much progress had you not taken action. Right? On your first visit, tell him about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. If he shows interest, lend him a copy of this book. Unless your friend wants to talk further about him, do not wear out your welcome. There's another don't. Don't wear out our welcome. Get into this is what we're going to do for step 3. And then step 4, we're going to start 3 weeks later. And I'm going to give you 10 days after that. Don't get into all this. Don't wear out your welcome. We outline the program of action, right? Give them a chance to think it over. And that's interesting, and I think they'll get into talking about this, but sometimes people will just say, no, let's do this. I'll stand outside this meeting room, and there'll be a new person going, man, I need help. I'm dying here. Let's just get this going. I want to get going. Well, listen, before we get into all that, go ahead and read the doctor's opinion for 7 days in a row. We're going to do it 30 days in a row, but I want you to do it 7 days in a row starting today. And then I want you to come back next week, and after the meeting, we'll discuss what you learned from that. And you know what, this desperate and not much, this isn't something I learned. My mentor taught me this, and it works very well. If you want to pierce through how somebody's willingness, over half the time they don't show up the next week. And if they did, of those, at least half of them, oh yeah, I didn't have time to read. I didn't. Oh, I forgot about that. Okay, if you know your life depends on this, and you're not even willing to read 7 1/4 pages for 7 days in a row, do you really think he's going to be willing to do all this and live by spiritual principles? So you don't kick him to the curb. What do we do? Okay, let's just pause on this. You leave the meeting, go back home, read the doctor's opinion for 7 days in a row, come back, and we'll talk about it next week. Till you know the person's willing, you know what you're doing. I wouldn't say you're wasting your time, but for me, it's taking time away from somebody who might really be interested. Right? If they're not willing, they're not willing. Give them time to think it over. Go home and think it over. If you do stay, let him steer the conversation any directions he likes. Sometimes a new man is anxious to proceed at once. Yeah, here it is. And you may be tempted to let him do so. This is sometimes a mistake. If he has trouble later, he's likely to say that you rushed him. You will be most successful with an alcoholic if you don't exhibit any passion for crusade or reform. Never talk down to an alcoholic from any moral or spiritual high top. Underline this comes from page 25. Simply lay out the kit of spiritual tools for his inspection. This is what it's required. Decide whether you're willing to do it. And show him how they work for you. Offer him friendship and fellowship. Tell him that if he wants to get well, you will do anything to help. Now, if he is not interested in your solution, if he expects you to act only as a banker for his financial difficulties or a nurse for his sprees, underline, you may have to drop him until he changes his mind. Okay, that's a pretty clear-cut direction. This he may do after he gets hurt some more. We've been talking about this repeatedly. If he is sincerely interested and wants to see you again, it's kind of what I just talked about, ask him to read this book in the interval. Doesn't say where to read the book. I like the doctor's opinion. It's the first thing that they really need to get down is to understand the illness. So I ask them to read the doctor's opinion in this book in the interval that they talk about here. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. He should not be pushed or prodded by you or his wife or husband or person closest to him or his friends. If he is to find, underline, if he is to find God, the desire must come from within. It's not about the desire to quit drinking. If he has a desire to find God, to turn his entire life around, not just not drink. We already know by now, when we don't drink, we're freaking miserable, right? The desire isn't to not drink. The desire is to feel better. That's what brings us here. Can't stand the way I feel. I blame it on drinking. But that's not the problem. That has to come from within. If he thinks he can do the job in some other way, this is important, or prefer some other spiritual approach, we don't tell him that ain't going to work, buddy. No. Even if it didn't work for me. No, it says encourage him to follow his own conscience. Try it. A is great to be the last house on the block is the way I always look at it. Having tried everything, come here, and then you're going to be most desperate and most open. You're not just, well, let me weigh this option versus the other 5 I've learned about and I'll decide what I want to do. Hopefully you're out of options. But if you're not, encourage them to follow their conscience. Underline this, that we have no monopoly on God. And that is so true. And a lot of times we seem to believe that. We have the answer to alcoholism. Well, guess what? We don't have the only answer to alcoholism. And it'd be pretty selfish, self-centered, and egotistical to think so, wouldn't it be? We have no monopoly on God. We merely have an approach that worked with us. And that's the point. That is our whole point here. I have something that worked for me. If you don't have any other solution, I've tried everything, I'm going to lay out the spiritual kit of tools that work for me and work for so many other people that I know. And even in this book, it's worked for many thousands. If you want to try, in fact, they even say it's rare when they were working with other people, it's rare for any of them to fail if they did exactly what they did. If you're interested, this might be a pretty good chance. But if you want to try something else, go ahead. That's how we approach. This is just simply something that worked for us. But point out that we alcoholics have much in common and that what you would like in any case to be friendly, and let it go at that. So you can still be friends. Do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. And here's the key. We were just talking about going through so many people until you find one. This is the qualification that they have to have. It says you are sure to find someone underlined desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. That's not on me. That's on them if they're eager enough. And how are they going to be eager? Again, pain. Enough pain, having tried all these other options that haven't worked. If they're hurting bad enough, then they're going to accept with eagerness what you offer. We find it a waste of time to keep chasing a man who either cannot or will not work with you. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Do we keep telling them, hey man, you're young, don't throw your life away? That's chasing a man down. Let me keep calling. It's a waste of time. And we just learned, even for his family, as painful as that is going to be to explain to them, that is the truth. If you leave such a person alone, he may soon become convinced that he cannot recover by himself. And how's he going to be convinced of that? Well, obviously, he's probably going to go try to recover by himself. And he is going to find he can't. Then he will be convinced that he can't, and he may come back. To spend too much time on any one situation is to deny some other alcoholic an opportunity to live and to be happy, which is something I explained earlier, just for myself. And this is not in the book. This is just myself. And they don't describe this one way or the other. In fact, they say if you're so situated, I believe it says, that you can spend most of your free time in this sort of work, meaning working with other people. I mean, there's people that sponsor lots of people, mentor lots and lots of people at the same time. I don't do that. It doesn't say to do it, but it said that people who have that kind of time, we don't think that we would be any more successful as a whole by doing it that way. Not that you don't do it that way. They don't say do or don't. Myself, with my schedule, I commit to working with one person at a time, and that's it. Just one at a time. That's just me. And so therefore, if I get a guy who obviously isn't going to read the doctor's opinion for 7 days in a row, I'm not going to waste time on somebody who doesn't want to get well in case somebody else does, because I will be denying that. And in fact, I've even had to tell a person this while trying to still work with him, because he really, really wants to let him know, listen, I only work with one person at a time. And if you don't really want this, I am denying somebody else who really does want this. So you really need to decide if you want to do this or not, So we don't want to waste too much time on him. One of our fellowship failed entirely with his first half dozen prospects. He often says if he had continued to work on them, he might have deprived many others who have since recovered of their chance. Suppose you are now making your second visit to your man. So now we're here, second time talking to him, right? All right. Where are we at here? He has read this volume and says, underline that he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. He's willing to go through with it. So there's your caveat. You need to know that he's willing to do that. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. We're going to teach him what's in here. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision, step 3, by the way, and tell his story, step 5, by the way. But do not insist upon him if he prefers to consult someone else. If he wants to work with somebody else, not let him do that. Sometimes that has to happen. I'll tell you why. I have found, even with where I came from in Florida, where we studied this book as we're doing here today, we had, 4 or 5 different meetings that did this same thing. And some of them were different. Some of them were doing exactly what we're doing now, where we start from the beginning, we rotate through 8, 9 months, and we start back over again. There's another meeting that we did that was just the doctor's opinion. So we studied every week, just doctor's opinion. We agnostics, just studying about step 2 and the idea of God, we agnostics. We did the one that I had led was, we called it a beginner's meeting. It's just given the basic information of our illness and the basic information of the solution we involve. So you're kind of all over the book doing that, but we're all studying in different ways. And I can tell you from when I started learning this, I could watch somebody do the doctor's opinion and explain it. And then maybe one week he wasn't there and somebody else filled in for him. And it could be, man, the second guy, he went over the exact same crap this guy's been doing for the last 6 months, but this guy really hit a nerve on this, and this. And I mean, I really connected with that, teaching the same information, but it's just different people it doesn't mean that he was any better. Maybe for other people, like, God, why am I wasting time at this meeting? When's Joe coming back? You know what I mean? We just don't know, but the thing is it's even in school, when you went to school, you could have taken algebra and it's just a mess, but then somebody else teaches it, it's like this really, and it's because of the way that they're explaining it hits with you. And the same thing works when we're working with a mentor, because what are we doing as a mentor? It says we're laying down the spiritual kit of tools. That just means we're going to show them what's in this book, just like we're doing right now. That's all. When I sit down with somebody mentoring him, all I do is exactly what we do here. Day one, let's go over the title page. But we're going to do it a little differently, because I'm going to read it and I'm going to ask you what that means to you. What does that mean to you? Because I need to make sure they understand. And then I'll explain it. And then I'll ask them to repeat to me in their own words what that now means to you. Make sure they get it. And we go through this very slow, and that's it. It's not opinions. It's not running their life. It's not nothing. Well, what do you think I should do with my wife? What I think you should do is pray to God and ask him what you should do. I can't manage my own life. I'm sorry. I can't manage yours. I just can't. Or I might know something to say, well, let's see what the book says. If we look over here on page so-and-so, this is what it says to do about that. It's not my opinion. So really, when sometimes people look at this and say, well, there's just not enough good information on how to work with somebody. There is the clearest cut information possible as to what to do and what not to do in this book to allow us to be most successful. That's been my experience anyways. So where are we at here? Last paragraph, 96. He may be broke and homeless. If he is, you might try to help him about getting a job or give him a little financial assistance. So we can do that. But you should not deprive your family or creditors of money that they should have. So how would we know if that's okay? Well, if we're worried about depriving our family, it might be a good idea to ask them how they feel about it, right? Get their consent. Perhaps you will want to take the man into your home for a few days. Oh, I've never had to do this. But be sure you use discretion, highlight and underline. Be certain he will be welcomed by your family. How are you going to know that? You might want to ask him before you offer, right? What do you think about me bringing in old Billy, you know, what do you think about that? You know, if not, then you probably shouldn't. But make sure he'll be welcomed by your family and that he is not trying to impose on you for money, connections, or shelter. We're pretty good at seeing through that BS, aren't we? Oh, we're real good at seeing through that. Yeah. We're masters at that kind of stuff. Permit that, and you will only be harming him. This is part of like the enabling thing that we talk about. And it's all you're going to do is lift his bottom up. Make sure he's willing. You will be making it possible for him to be insincere. You may be aiding in his destruction rather than his recovery. However, we're at top of 97. Never avoid these responsibilities, but be sure you are doing the right thing if you assume them. Helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. A kindly act once in a while, that isn't enough. Period. You have to act the Good Samaritan every day if need be. Okay, so what we're going to go through, I'm going to finish with this paragraph, but we're going to go through here. What I want you to look at is this really gets into if you're mentoring somebody, and I think I will highlight this if I have not already done so since we started this chapter, just so that we got it recorded. But in AA, we use the word sponsor. Okay. We know that the AA program is to be found where? Where did you read we'd find the AA program? The first portion of this book. That means if it's not in the first portion of this book, it's not the AA program, because the entire AA program is in the first portion of this book. The word sponsor is not used in the first portion of this book. And at one point I did look up, because I've learned to use the dictionary ever since to understand things, so I don't use my opinion, learn not to use my opinion. And when you look up sponsor, that is defined in the dictionary. There's several definitions, as there are for many words, but in this context, it's defined as somebody who takes responsibility for somebody else. And the first time I read that, we don't take responsibility for somebody else. Didn't we just read we're not responsible for the outcome, right? So that doesn't fit it. But what do we do then? Then it comes back to what do we do when we're working with somebody? We're teaching them what's in here. That's where we started using the word mentor. That seems to fit much better. Whatever term you use, it's up to you. But when you get into mentoring somebody, what we're going to read here is what is involved with it. because it's not just meeting with a guy once a week. If you finally decide, okay, one of the biggest things that held me back, even when I started doing, no, I think it was before I started actually doing these meetings, is once I'd recovered and been recovered for a little while, and you feel the promises and everything's great, and then it starts wearing off. Okay, because why? Because I'm not doing this. Mm-hmm. But then I think, and my mentor's pushing me, and I'm thinking, I can't do this. I don't know this information like you know it. I can't do that. I'm not going to know what to do. I'm not going to know how to do it. He said, well, listen, you need to be just as willing to do this as you were willing to do everything you did prior to this. And you're never going to get good at it until you start. You have to start somewhere. So it's something that we have to do. And he sat with me with the first person that I mentored, walking through it. Let me do it. But if he thought something might have been getting a little off, he told me. I didn't like it. But you know what? I learned. And then we got better at it. So we have to do it. And we're going to learn here in this paragraph some of the other things that we do that we may not like, but we're also going to learn in here is what rewards that we get as a result of it. Remember where it said it helps us more than it helps them? See what that looks like. It says you have to act a good spirit in every day if need be. It may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures. Man, I got this thing to go to and I got to go meet with him. God, I don't want to do this. It's going to great interference, interruptions to your business. It may mean sharing your money in your home, counseling frantic wives and relatives, innumerable trips to police courts, sanitariums, hospitals, jails, asylums, and probably even treatment centers nowadays. Your telephone may jangle at any time of day or night. Your wife may sometimes say she is being neglected. That creates a lot of troubles in our own home, right? A drunk may smash the furniture in your home or burst or burn a mattress. You may have to fight with him if he is violent. Sometimes you will have to call a doctor and administer sedatives under his direction. Another time, you may have to send for the police or an ambulance. Occasionally, you will have to meet such conditions. You will have to. Have to is another word for must. We seldom allow an alcoholic to live in our homes for a long time, and it's not good for him, and it sometimes creates serious complications in the family. Do you think? Do you think? All right, so yeah, I think I'll still hit this last paragraph. Though an alcoholic does not respond, so the guy is not going through with the process. Underline this. There is no reason why you should neglect his family. If you remember in the beginning, in the doctor's opinion, this was the way that they were doing things for these men and their families. This was the basis of the fellowship for these men and their families. So we will continue to work with the families if they want to. You should continue to be friendly to them and underline this. The family, because this is clear cut, the family should be offered your way of life, period. This stuff that we do up here in our way of living, this is not only for alcoholics, drug addicts, period. Didn't we read in the beginning that our way of living has its advantages for all? All is everyone and anyone. So we offer our way of living. And should they accept and practice spiritual principles, there's a much better chance that the head of the family will recover. And even though he continues to drink, the family will find life more bearable. And we're going to learn a whole lot about that in the next chapter. So I'm going to stop right there for the evening. Yep, that's a good place to stop for the day.